because we're going to be reading more of this book of Stone to Abbigale by Onision. Just fucking end me. Alright, so last chapter was incoherent nonsense, so let's go ahead and listen to, or read to some more incoherent nonsense. Chapter 2. The following morning, Mr. Hansen approached me in the hall before class started. "We're supposed to talk," he said, in his usual stern voice. I responded, "I know, but what about?" He began gesturing with his hands, as he often did. I guess it was a habit he developed to trick people into believing he was saying something interesting. Reading this, this person seems like, like a rude shit. Kind of explains, again, Onision. "You know you're a smart kid, but you keep showing up late to my classes, and it's becoming a problem," he said. Surprised, he showed genuine interest. I replied with a smirk. "I'll do better in the future," he continued. "All right. Well, I also wanted to ask you about a TA opportunity." A TA opportunity? What the fuck is a TA opportunity? I replied, "You don't have a teacher's... Oh, teacher's assistant. Okay." I watched a bead of sweat fall down his balding forehead as he responded. "The last TA moved, and yeah, you're not always on time, but you get your work done honestly and effectively." I asked, "Okay, Mr. Hansen, next semester?" He authoritatively, hold on. It might just be me. Authoritatively. I did not get what I wanted. I am looking this word up. Authoritatively. Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, in a way that is trusted as being accurate or true with authority. Okay. I kind of wonder if Onision uses big words to try to make him sound smart, but not knowing what they fucking mean. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe, for instance, his spouse probably put in some of these words to make him sound smarter. Replied, "No, you can just take an elective class credit, and I'll let your current teacher know you'll be working with me from here on." I immediately thought of the possibility of losing art class and rejected the idea. "My only elective is art class right now, and I don't want to give that up," I said. He took a step back, looking offended, and lost his temper. In a disgruntled tone, he said, Art class is a joke, James. Tell me one person you know who is making a living painting pictures." All the students nearby in the hall stopped and looked towards the shouting. I looked at Mr. Hansen, unaffected, reminding him I would not give it up. I wasn't about to sacrifice the one class I had with Abby for alone time with a sweaty, anger-prone history teacher. Mr. Hansen looked at everyone, stopped in the hall, and screamed, "Oh, ha ha, everyone look at Mr. Hansen, who's such a goof. Move along, kids." Everyone just looked at him as he turned back to me. Maintaining his clearly frustrated posture, he then waddled into his classroom to begin class. I reluctantly entered with the remaining students to sit at my desk, which was conveniently placed within broomstick range from Mr. Hansen's desk. After enduring another useless history lesson revolving around my home state of Washington, it was finally time for art class. I walked as fast as I could without looking too awkward in my normal fashion. Okay. Only to find Abby wasn't even in the room. I sat down in my new seat and waited, only to see everyone but her fill the room. Miss Stanley closed the door to our class trailer and instructed us to begin dismembering the possessions we brought from home. I began cutting the bear with a scalpel Miss Stanley provided me, but my muscles seemed to work on their own as I find myself consumed with Abby again. Her overwhelming presence on the edge of every thought fragment in my mind. Thought fragment. The fuck? Just a short while into class, I found myself looking down at my bear, now cut into 6 pieces. I felt like I was in a science class or science lab dissecting an actual animal, the most noticeable difference being that the cotton stuffing didn't look like or stink of old flesh and death like real animals do. Later that day during lunch, due to my mom not being able to afford buying me a cell phone, I used a payphone to call Abby, but got no answer. I didn't feel like eating, so the rest of lunch I just sat on the bench outside staring at people interacting with each other. I made a major effort to distract myself, knowing that focusing on what could be was mostly a waste, considering I was so powerless to influence any change at that point. Oh, don't worry, I'm sure you'll probably become God and influence, or actually manipulate people. I'm quoting his fucking terrible book, was it Reaper's Creek? That book was shit. Even just watching the bushes move around in the wind made more sense to me than letting worry consume me. Later that night, after I had just finished my shower, I placed the one cordless phone we had in my house next to my bed on my windowsill. I would have dialed her, but I didn't want to call more than once a day for fear of wearing out my welcome. That night, a few different calls came in, but they were always for my sister Lisa. Her receiving a barrage of phone calls from random guys was nothing new to anyone in the house. The normal conversation you could expect to hear Lisa take part in, with excessive projection in her voice, would most always revolve around how stupid she thought other girls at school were and how she hates basically everything about Lakewood High. I didn't want to know what she was talking about. Ever but my TV volume couldn't compete with her noise. Wait a minute. I'm going to read the sentence before that. I didn't want to know what she was talking about ever but. So there's a comma. If I'm remembering my there's a comma after about, then ever, comma, but my TV volume. I feel like there was something there, and either it was taken out or he it was just two random thoughts that he just put together. It makes no sense. But my TV volume couldn't compete with her voice. It was like she thought she was so important. Everyone around her just had to hear everything she had to say, no matter how trivial the topic. After a couple hours, she finally stopped running her mouth, so I turned off my TV, and with it, my room faded to darkness. I welcomed the silence like a warm blanket on a cold night. I woke up the next morning to see the phone sitting there just like my stupid alarm clock, useless and unbearably annoying to look at. I expected it to sound off at some point, but like the clock, it failed to deliver. It was raining outside, clouds filled the sky in normal Lakewood fashion. I wasn't going to skate to school this time out of fear it would rust my skates and hinder my ability to skate fast, if even at all. Doesn't it take a while for rust to build up on? And what kind of here's my question. What kind of like wheels are we talking about? Are you talking like metal wheels? What the fuck? I don't think I've ever heard of like metal wheels for skates. That makes no sense. Instead, I decided to ride the bus, pretending for only moments I really had a choice. So I climbed up the bus steps. Davis rang out, "Hallelujah, James is here to save everyone from the evil clouds." I genuinely smiled for the first time that morning thanks to him. As usual, I sat next to the window seat that Davis courteously always offered me. The beginning of history class was the same old story. The usual, I barely paid attention, or as usual, I barely paid attention. I just thought about Abby and hoped she was okay. Interrupting my thoughts of Abby came a very rude outburst by Jason. It was odd to hear his voice, as I wasn't supposed to see him till our class. He stood outside our closed class door, waving his hands in hope of disrupting us. It was clearly for no reason. It was clearly for no reason more meaningful than a toddler. I think there should have been a period there, like after reason. And then more meaningful than a toddler would ever invoking or have wait. More meaningful than a toddler would have in invoking chaos around their immediate environment. Some people just want to get an emotional reaction to their behavior so they can feel a sense of power or control. Gee, that kind of reminds me of somebody. Jason began banging on the door, so Mr. Hansen walked over and opened the door and asked, "Why aren't you in class?" Jason responded saying, "Got kicked out. What's up?" "Go stand outside your class till it's over," Mr. Hansen commanded. Jason rebelliously replied, "Don't tell me what to do, fatty." I could see Mr. Hansen was about to lose it, so I interrupted. "No one wants you here, Jason." Mr. Hansen looked back at me with a look of surprise. He seemed shocked I would say anything on his behalf. Jason became extremely silent, now refusing to look anywhere but at me. His glare was intense, but it seemed so focused. I think it would have sounded better. Like, is it just me? Or here's a thought. Would it sound better if this would have said, his glare was intense, and also, or wait, hold on. His glare was intense, but it seemed so forced, like he wasn't really offended, but didn't want to look weak in front of everyone. I don't know. I just hate this fucking book. Mr. Hansen then closed the door inches away from Jason's nose, but that didn't stop him from staring intensely through the vertical window slot in the door. He remained so still and consistent in his stare, it was almost as if he had become a red-faced, almost cartoonish portrait hanging in the door. As class came closer to an end, Jason was no longer staring at me and wasn't even visible from my perspective. Knowing Jason had something left to prove, many of the students naturally assumed he was somewhere within the immediate vicinity. I could tell most everyone was concerned as they kept looking back at me, wondering what I was going to do about the clearly unstable and enraged jock that no doubt was still lurking just outside the door. Every kid in there knew I couldn't just hide out in the class. I was sure this was some kind of victory for Mr. Hansen. He knew I wouldn't have this immediate problem had I accepted his offer to TA for him. My decision led me to this. I built a doorway to certain destruction, and I knew if I was going to be brave, I had to walk through it. I didn't have time to deal with hesitating once class was over. Since Abby was my real priority, I walked out of class just like I normally did, only this time Jason was following close behind. As I'm sure most everyone assumed he would, I was about to leave the main building to head over to the art trailer, only to feel a hand grab my shoulder. The hand slipped as I pulled away, nails scraping along my skin to clamp on my shirt. I was then yanked swiftly back from the main hall door. It began. I yanked my shirt aggressively out of his hand and clutched my now scratched up shoulder. I was now facing Jason, who immediately lunged? Is that supposed to be lunged? Hold on. Is that supposed to be lunged? Because he spelled it as lunged. Lunged. Which is having lungs, especially of a specific kind. So he used the wrong word. How do you spell lunge? Lunge. Not lunch. Lunge. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not the word that he was supposed to use. Let me try one more time. You guys can hear my phone going off. Lunge. It keeps going to lunch. What the fuck? I'm sorry for the unprofessionalism, but Okay. I think I found it. So, looking at it. Okay, maybe there was. Okay, I'm just double checking because it's, oh my gosh, this is so fucking weird. Okay, lunged at me and threw into the already half broken hall door just behind me. I bounced back from the impact and pushed Jason in the center of his chest to distract him from me so I could continue walking away. Without hesitation, he used my response to justify further violence and began throwing punches. I was knocked to the ground within seconds, and he began trying to pull off my backpack, resulting in me being briefly dragged across the floor like a helpless child. I was now a couple yards away from the door. I was trying to leave through. I twisted away to return to a standing position while simultaneously snatching my backpack back so hard that it flew out of my hands and smacked the door behind me, leaving a huge crack in the glass. I could hear glass falling from the door behind me. People began to gather around us, and like a chemical reaction, they began screaming just as they did before. Much of what was happening was a blur, but I remember they would scream every time Jason hit me throughout the irrefutably one-way fight. It quickly got to the point where I didn't even feel the punches. I could only feel them laughing and yelling as Jason swung again and again. I kept falling over and over, but every time I would return to stand only to fail at defending myself from further blows. I didn't block a single hit. I didn't even throw one punch at him. As my nose began to bleed, one of the boys my sister was friends with, Matthew, grabbed me and pulled me out of the fight. He was twice my size, but was also he was also on Jason's football team, so naturally he did nothing to help me win. The only thing he offered me was an end to the beating I was suffering. Shortly after the fight, I found myself sitting on the mattress in the nurse's office, not allowed to leave, not allowed to do anything but think about what happened. Despite everything in my head feeling scrambled and disorganized, there was Abby waiting in the same place, just as she sat in the back class. She radiated warmly in the back of my mind. As lunch approached, Principal Lehman came into the room. I was staying in at the nurse's office, and asked me how I was feeling. I responded, "Well, my tooth is chipped, my chin hurts, my face is bruised, and I just got humiliated in front of my peers." Mr. Lehman said, I've gotten multiple statements saying you pushed him. What's your response?" I replied, "I pushed him back after he pushed me first. All I did was push him back once, and then he did this to my face." I had a circular motion around my face showing how one-sided the fight way. fight was. Okay. How many more pages do I have? I'm at part 26. Alright, I'm almost done. Principal Lehman said in a commanding voice, well, he's suspended for 10 days. He paused, and I felt relieved, assuming the principal was on my side, but then he continued, you will be suspended for 2 days. I was surprised they would suspend someone for just pushing back when they are pushed. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore being assaulted? If school is meant to teach us how to survive in the real world, in the real world, you are legally allowed to defend yourself. How could they justify this punishment? Principal Lehman informed me I could finish up the day and not return for the following 2 days. You should be at least grateful for that. Jason was escorted off school grounds entirely. He said. Principal Lehman stared at me, sitting there, helpless and about to break down. Okay then, see you again in a few days, he said, and quickly walked away. All I could focus on feeling in that moment was the tacky ice pack on my face and a sinking feeling of worthlessness. It's not something I like to admit, but the truth is I cried seconds after principal, I don't know why I said police, Lehman left the room. The type of cry you suppress, but your eyes still become red, your body trembles, and trembles, and painful hot tears. He puts painfully, so painful hot tears still fall. Alright, and it was the type of sadness that made a person ache to their core. But you do your best to hold on, to not lose yourself to your emotions like you would so carelessly do as a child. I sat in the room alone until I could collect myself. Shortly after, I gathered my stuff and proceeded to finish my classes for the day. I also asked a couple of my teachers about any work I would miss so I could keep up while I was suspended, but didn't have the motivation to stop by every single class before leaving the school entirely. As I was about to get on the bus home, I looked over to see Abby again in the parking lot with her boyfriend Seth. They were standing by his car. This time, they were not showing affection. In fact, she seemed like she wasn't even willing to look at him, despite him clearly and aggressively speaking to her. Without a second's thought, I shifted away from the bus and began walking over to Abby to see if she was okay. The more I could hear Seth's tone as I approached, the more worried I became. Seth reacted to me like a guard dog in a ghetto fenced yard. Once he realized I had headed towards him, he puffed out his shoulders and glared at me in attempts to look intimidating. Abby remained upset. It seemed like she was emotionally unable to look anywhere but the ground. Now, within a fair speaking range, I tried to sound optimistic for the sake of Abby's emotional state. Hey, Abby, were you at art class today? I asked. Her boyfriend stepped in front of her to block my view and said, "Are you the kid that called her the other night?" I responded, "Yeah, you're. Just ignore him, James," Abby said, mumbled loudly behind Seth. Seth looked behind as if An arrow had just been plunged into his chest. Abby then walked around him, looking only at me, and said, "Will you walk me?" but paused when she saw my face. Abby's facial expression changed quickly to shock as she asked in an alarmed tone what happened. Her boyfriend busted out laughing. "Oh, you didn't see this idiot get wrecked by Jason? He didn't even fight back. I would have had that jock prick choking on his own blood in seconds. But you just took a beating like a..." Abby interrupted, screaming, Shut up, Seth. You sadistic freak." Seth's grin turned into a scowl. He rapidly stepped towards her, so I blocked his path by stepping in front of him. Seth looked more mortified than I had ever seen a person get in such a short time. Knowing him, I could see he had a number of mental and emotional issues, more so than I understood. Seth didn't even try to get past me to Abby, and he let his voice reach her with his screams. "You have no respect after what I've done for you." Abby replied, "I'm sick of this, Seth. I want nothing to do with you." Her voice cracked as Seth screamed once more, "If you're ending this again..." He didn't know what to say, but in his eyes I could see a deep, intense hatred. When I look in most people's eyes, I saw all kinds of things, but in him there was only anger and pain. His hands were shaking furiously, his breathing noticeably irregular. He was losing it. Abby still refused to look at Seth as he threw his tantrum. He yelled, "Fine. Be with a guy who can't even protect himself, idiot." Seth got into a car as Abby tightly grabbed my arm. Her eyes remained closed like she was scared, hiding in a shell. She jumped at the sound of Seth slamming his car door. Recklessly, Seth floored the gas pedal, and his car lurched forward, barely missing Abby and me as he pulled out of the parking lot. Abby stood silently by with her eyes closed. Abby stood silently by with her eyes closed. I didn't know how to act in a situation like this. Trying not to make things worse, I just said, "I will walk you home." To answer your question, Abby opened her eyes but remained silent. She nodded. We had been walking for a while, every step making us feel like we were silently further from our problems. She finally spoke. "So I was in art class, and I saw your cut up bear." I responded, "Yeah. Creepy, right? Maybe it was a foobar idea." She laughed a little. "Yeah, I guess we're kind of weird." I was all game for it. I softly laughed as I began to feel raindrops hitting my arms and neck. "I hear running is just as bad as walking in the rain," I said. "You get just as wet," she replied. "Yeah, something like that. It's like the harder you try to fix some problems, the worse they get. I impulsively asked to confirm what I had earlier seen, so your Seth is, she interrupted, hopefully soon completely out of my life. My curiosity overtook me. I asked what happened. She frowned and said, other than what happened in the parking lot, I responded. Well, I mean, I don't know. Don't say anything you don't want to. She stared at her feet as we continued to walk. I noticed her makeup was running. Shortly after, she noticed too and began to rush us. Getting home, walking faster, she said, I'm sorry. I really don't want you to see me like this. She continued to rush silently ahead of me. I stopped walking and said, hey. She slowed down and stopped, still facing away from me. She stood in the rain for only a few seconds before she asked, do you think makeup really helps anyone? I replied, still looking at her bag, I think it helps us forget what we don't want to remember. It lets us pretend we're a little more perfect than we really are. She laughed silently and said, that's one way to put it. Blech. I smiled and replied, makeup is just makeup, and skin is just skin. It is what it is. If only Onision would know that, considering, or at least understand that. It's funny that when you read this, because in reality, like, if you look at Onision and his bullshit, he is constantly harping on people's imagery, or how people look, their weight, etc. So this whole line is like, skin is just skin, is complete and utter bullshit. He doesn't believe that shit. Abby looked up at the rain for a moment, and then down at the ground again. She then turned around with her rain-soaked face revealing what she was hiding under her makeup. Standing before her in the rain, looking at the results of what she had suffered, it broke my heart. Abby wasn't worried about her makeup running for the reason I thought. She was just afraid of what I would think when I saw the bruises on her face. Some just like mine. Do you see them? She asked with a quiver in her voice. Without restraint, I responded with the first thing that came to mind. I see a beautiful girl who I very much enjoy walking with in the rain, despite her face being covered in falling drops of water. I could clearly see tears fall from her eyes. Her head fell forward as she began to shake. Her tears falling almost in sync with the rain, I walked up to her and put my arm around her side and walked with her the rest of the way home. As we got to her doorstep, I said, I'm just 7 letters away. Call if you need anything, okay? She smiled and nodded. See you tomorrow, she asked. I replied, wait, see you tomorrow? She asked. I replied, I got suspended for 2 days. She looked offended. Wow, punishing the guy who got beat up, classy, I responded. Yeah, well, I pushed him back, she replied clearly. Not hard enough. I laughed sadly, looking down as she unexpectedly wrapped her arms around me. Despite it being so cold out and her being soaked, it was the warmest hug I had ever received. I hugged her back and said goodbye and walked home with a huge smile on my face, bruises and all. Alright, so that was chapter 2 of this book. I'm just going to go through like each chapter at a time for videos. But yeah, I just this book's crap. I like, and it's funny that he like claims that he sources it from reality or things that happen in his life, and then looking at this, because obviously the character James is him, and the way this person talks, as well as when it comes down to some of the details they mention, like especially with him talking about, oh, skin is just skin, it irritates me, because I mean, again, we've seen Onision fully judge people depending on their looks, how old they are, their hair, etc. So that this whole thing is just bullshit. But anyway, thank you guys for, suffering with me for the second chapter. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you guys can, please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you guys want to follow us on social media, links are in the description down below, as well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast. I'm signing off. Have a good one. And take care. Peace.